Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
Wait an official announcement, but NBC News has now confirmed the earlier reports that Michael Jackson, planning on the verge of his greatest or certainly most difficult comeback of many in a long and varied career in entertainment, and one of the most controversial figures in American pop culture, if not in the society as a whole, is dead tonight at the age.
A special good evening tonight to our viewers joining us on the West Coast, especially in Los Angeles, where we're getting live pictures of the helicopter about to take off from UCLA Medical Center bearing the body of Michael Jackson.
June 25, 2009. 3 children lost their father. Prince was 12 years old. Paris was 11. Blanket was just 7. In a single morning, the world they had known collapsed completely. The carefully constructed private world their father had spent years building around them. The masks in public, the private tutors, the small and protected circle of people they were allowed to trust, all of it disappeared in the time it takes for a phone call to travel from a house in Los Angeles to every news organization on Earth. And the world outside those walls, the one that had spent decades watching their father, suddenly turned its full and overwhelming attention toward them. For years after that morning, Michael Jackson's 3 children said almost nothing publicly. They were shielded by their grandmother, Katherine, kept away from cameras and journalists, and the press that had followed their father to the end of his life. They were given, as much as their extraordinary circumstances possibly allowed, the space to simply be children who were grieving rather than children performing grief for an audience that numbered in the millions. But children grow up, and as Prince, Paris, and Blanket became adults, navigating their own paths through a world that had strong opinions about their father.
Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
Before any of them were old enough to form their own, the silence began to break. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, carefully, in ways that reflected the specific personalities of 3 very different people who happened to share the most famous surname in modern entertainment history. What they revealed when they finally began to speak was not what many people expected. It was more honest than the simple tributes the press was anticipating, more complicated than the defensive statements the tabloids were hoping for, more human, in every sense of that word, than the simplified versions of their father's story that had dominated public conversation for the better part of 2 decades. This is their story, not his, theirs. The story of what 3 children who actually knew Michael Jackson, who lived with him and ate with him and argued with him about homework, have chosen to share about the man behind the name that the world spent so many years arguing about. Hovern Mulligrover, February 14, 1997. Prince Michael Jackson was born. He arrived into a world where his father was already one of the most recognized human beings alive, where the announcement of his birth was international news, and where the question of what his life would look like was being debated by strangers before he had taken his first breath. Paris Michael Katherine Jackson followed on April 3, 1998, and Prince Michael Jackson II, who the world knew as Blanket and who would later ask to be called Biggie, was born on February 21, 2002. 3 children, 3 completely different personalities, one shared and completely unprecedented circumstance. The childhood they lived looked, from the outside, almost impossible to understand. They wore masks and veils in public to protect their faces from cameras. They moved between different rented homes across different countries, with a frequency that made the concept of town essentially meaningless to them. Their social world was deliberately small, restricted to people their father trusted absolutely, which was a very short list. They were educated privately. Their friendships were limited by the simple and brutal reality of who their father was and what that meant for the safety of everyone who got close to them.
Ordinary childhood experiences, school plays, neighborhood friends, walking to a shop, going to a cinema without security,
were things they learned about largely from books and films rather than from personal experience. And yet what Prince, Paris, and Biggie have each described, in their own time and in their own way, about the experience of growing up inside all of that is something that consistently surprises people who had only ever seen the external version of their lives. They describe warmth, genuine warmth, not the managed warmth of a public figure performing for cameras, but the specific, everyday warmth of a home where a parent was actually present, a home where there was laughter, where there were arguments about mundane things, where meals were shared at a table and films were watched together, and opinions about things were formed and debated and taken seriously. Paris has spoken about waking up in the morning and finding her father already awake, reading, music playing quietly somewhere in the house. Prince has described a father who had opinions about everything and was genuinely. He has built a life that is recognizably his own rather than simply an extension of the enormous name he carries. He attended Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He pursued business interests. He has been involved in charitable work. He has made choices about which public opportunities to accept and which to decline that reflect someone who has thought carefully about what he wants his presence in the world to actually mean, rather than simply responding to the loudest demand or the most flattering offer. When Prince has spoken about Michael Jackson in interviews, the thing that stands out most consistently is how he speaks about a father rather than an icon. Not the performer. Not the figure the press spent 4 decades constructing out of headlines and legal proceedings and speculation. A man who made breakfast, who had strong opinions about films, who laughed at specific things and got annoyed at specific things, and showed up for his children in the specific, unglamorous daily ways that real parenting actually requires. He has spoken about grief with a directness that many people found surprising given how guarded the family had been for so many years. About what it meant to lose a parent at 12 years old. About the particular and genuinely strange difficulty of processing that loss while the entire world was simultaneously processing something, a different something, the loss of a cultural figure they had constructed in their own minds, rather than the loss of a father who had made breakfast that morning. He has talked about the experience of growing up with a name that the world had strong feelings about before he was old enough to form his own. About the work of figuring out who he actually was separate from that inheritance, while still honoring it. About finding what he genuinely cared about rather than simply responding to what everyone else assumed he should care about. What comes through in everything Prince has shared is a person doing serious and intentional work, not performing grief, not performing gratitude, not performing the role of Michael Jackson's son in the way the entertainment industry would find most commercially useful. Just building a life, carefully and deliberately, from the foundation his father gave him and towards something that is genuinely his own. He has said that his father told him and his siblings directly, more than once, that he wanted them to become their own people. Not extensions of his legacy, not guardians of a myth, their own people, with their own opinions and their own paths and their own understanding of what mattered to them specifically. Prince has taken that instruction seriously, and the life he has built reflects it. Ohangrawaz, of the 3 children, Paris Jackson has been the most publicly open about her life, her experiences, and her father. She made a decision at some point in her early adulthood to engage with the world on her own terms, to speak rather than remain silent, to be visible rather than protected, to share rather than withhold. That decision came with real costs. She has been scrutinized in ways that were not always fair and not always kind. The press that had been prevented from photographing her face as a child eventually found her as a young adult and built narratives around her that she had no real ability to control. She has handled all of it with a combination of directness and resilience that people who knew her father find genuinely familiar. What Paris has said about Michael Jackson across interviews, social media posts, and public appearances over the years is some of the most honest testimony about him that exists anywhere, not because it paints a perfect picture. She has not sanitized her account of her childhood or pretended that growing up under those circumstances did not have complicated effects on her. She has said directly that their life was unusual and that unusual circumstances leave marks. But she has also said, with complete clarity and without any apparent concern for how it might be received by people who had already decided what the truth was, that her father loved her, specifically, deeply, in the ordinary daily ways that love is actually expressed between a parent and a child. She has described things he did, specific things, not vague sentiments. The way he talked to her, the things he taught her, the way he responded when she was upset or scared or confused about something. She has spoken about her mental health with a courage that echoes, in a specific and recognizable way, the courage her father showed in his own most honest public moments. She has not hidden the hardest parts of her experience, and in not hiding them, She has done something her father consistently tried to do, and often found difficult in the face of the enormous machinery surrounding his life. She has let people see a real person rather than a constructed image. Paris has also spoken about the day her father died with a directness that is genuinely difficult to receive. She was 11 years old. She was in the house. She has described, in terms that are simple and precise, the experience of understanding what had happened and what it felt like to be surrounded by a world that was also grieving, but grieving something entirely different from what she was grieving. The world lost an icon. She lost her father. Those are not the same loss. And being a child inside the smaller, more personal version of that grief, while the larger, louder, global version of it was happening all around her, was something she has described as profoundly and almost unbearably isolating. She has spoken about her creative work with genuine enthusiasm, about music and acting as ways of expressing things that resist direct statement, about using the platform her name provides for things that matter to her, particularly around mental health awareness, in ways that reflect a clear and considered sense of what she actually wants to do with the visibility she carries. She has not tried to be her father. She has not tried to disappear from a world that already knew her name. She has tried, with considerable courage and considerable honesty, to be herself inside circumstances that most people will never have to navigate. And the picture that emerges from everything she has shared is someone shaped by genuine love, genuine loss, and a genuine determination to make something meaningful out of both. The youngest of Michael Jackson's 3 children has chosen the most private path of the 3. Blanket, who asked to be called Biggie as he entered adulthood, has stayed almost entirely away from public attention in ways his older siblings have not. He has not given extended interviews. He has not built a public social media presence. He has not sought the visibility that his name would make available to him almost instantly if he chose to pursue it. This choice deserves as much attention and as much respect as his siblings' choices of greater openness. Perhaps more, because the pressure on him to engage publicly has been enormous, and his resistance to that pressure has been complete and consistent. Biggie Jackson was 7 years old when his father died. He is the member of this family who has the least publicly accessible memory of his father as a living presence, and who has therefore had to build his understanding of who that person was primarily from what others have said, and from what the historical record contains, rather than from personal recollection in the way his older siblings can access. He was also the subject, at 7 months old, of one of the most discussed celebrity photographs of the early 2000s. The image of his father holding him over a hotel balcony in Berlin became one of the most reproduced and most debated images associated with Michael Jackson's later public life. He had no say in any of it. He was 7 months old, and yet that image became part of the public story attached to his name before he was old enough to understand what a name was. Growing up with that as part of your history, as one of the defining images connected to you before you could form a memory, shapes a relationship with public attention in ways that are not particularly complicated to understand. Privacy, for Biggie, is not simply a preference. It is a response to a very specific and very early experience of having your existence treated as public property. The limited things that have emerged from people who know him describe someone thoughtful and grounded, someone who has found ways to build a meaningful private life without requiring public validation to confirm its worth, someone who carries his father's name with awareness, but without the need to perform that inheritance for an audience. His choice of silence is itself a statement, not about his father, not about his family, about himself, about what he values and how he intends to move through a world that will always know his name before it knows him. That choice deserves to be read as what it is, not absence, not damage, a considered and deliberate decision made by a person who knows exactly what the alternative looks like and has decided, clearly and consistently, that it is not for him. Hanhambru was. Running through everything that Michael Jackson's 3 children have shared, across 15 years of slowly and carefully breaking a silence that protected them during their most vulnerable years, is a consistent and underlying message, a thing they each seem to want people to understand, arriving at it from different directions and with different words, but always landing in the same place. They want people to know who their father actually was. Not the version assembled from headlines. Not the figure constructed from legal proceedings and tabloid photographs and documentary footage selected for maximum impact rather than maximum accuracy. Not the myth, positive or negative, that the world spent 4 decades building around a name it never actually knew personally. The actual person, the father they knew. They are not asking anyone to ignore the complicated parts of his story. They are not requesting uncritical celebration or demanding that every question about his life be declared permanently closed. What they are asking for, in different ways and with different levels of directness, is honesty. A willingness to look at the complete picture, the full person. Not the version that fits most neatly into a predetermined narrative, but the one that actually existed in the daily, specific, unglamorous reality of family life. They want people to know that he loved them, not as an abstract statement of parental feeling, but as a practical, daily, expressed reality. That he showed up, that he was present, that he cooked for them and read to them and argued with them and worried about them and talked to them seriously about the world and what they thought about it. They want people to know that losing him was not a public event for them. It was a personal one, the most personal thing that has ever happened to any of them. That they are not the children of an icon who died. They are people who lost their father when they were 7 and 11 and 12 years old, and who have carried that loss through every subsequent year of their lives. And they want people to know that the man behind the name was trying, through all of it, through every difficult period, and every controversy, and every painful public year. He was trying to do the right thing by his children, trying to make work that mattered, trying to be the kind of person that the scale of his fame and the weight of his circumstances made genuinely difficult to be. They know who he was, they lived with him, they saw him every day without cameras present, and what they have chosen to share about that experience, across 15 years of careful and considered public testimony, is more complete and more honest than anything the press produced about him across 4 decades of relentless coverage. He was their father, and they loved him. And they want the world to finally fully understand that those 2 facts are the most important things about all of it. That is what Michael Jackson's children revealed after years of silence. Not a scandal, not a confirmation of the worst versions of his story, not a simple, uncomplicated celebration of the best ones. Something considerably harder and considerably more valuable than any of those things. The truth of what it meant to be his child. The truth of who he was to the people who actually knew him. And the quiet, determined insistence that the world make enough room in its understanding of this story to include the version that came from the people who were actually there. Which of their stories moved you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there is still so much more of this story that deserves to be told.